David. Adonai ro'i lo echsar, binodeh she'yarbitzeni, al mei menuchot yinahaleni nafshi yeshoveh. Yancheni v'maglei tzedek leman shemo. Gam ki elech begeit sama velo irara ki ata imadi. Shivtecha umishantecha hema yenachamuni. Taroch lefanai, shulchan neged sorerai, dishanta v'Hashem en roshi, kosi rivaya. Ach tov v'chesed yirdefuni kol yemei chayai. Veshavti beveit Adonai leorech yamim. A Psalm of David. Adonai, God is my shepherd, I shall not want. God makes me lie down in green pastures, leads me beside the still waters, and restores my soul. Guides me on the right path, for that is God's nature. Though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no harm, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a banquet for me in the presence of my foes. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and loving kindness shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of God forever. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming. We are here today to perform a mitzvah, a righteous act, to honor a remarkable lady, Rochelle Blumenthal, to pay her the ultimate respect of accompanying her to her final resting place, and to say goodbye. Jewish tradition teaches us death is better than a life of pain, and eternal rest is better than a constant sickness. As a drop of water in the sea, as a grain of sand on the shore, are our few days of eternity. The good things in life last for a short time. Wealth, health, even life passes away. But a good name, a good reputation, endures forever. We are here today to pay tribute to the name Rochelle Blumenthal made for herself over the course of her life. A name which will forever be linked with strength and courage, bravery, resiliency and determination, generosity and kindness, selflessness, boundless energy, practicality and planning, kindness, honesty, and devotion to both community and family, a name which will live on as a blessing. Rochelle passed away Wednesday night, March 13th, 2019. On the Hebrew calendar, the 7th day in the month of Adar II in the year 5779. She was 83 years old. She will be dearly missed by her 4 children, Susan and her husband Ab, Heather and her husband Otto, Brian and his wife Lisa, Jennifer and her husband Danny, by her 7 grandchildren, who lovingly called her Grandma Rochelle, Rebecca, Layla and Zach, Miles and Ira, Spencer and Jack, and by her older brother, Bernard Bakey Schwartz, and his wife Barbara. Rochelle was born Rochelle Schwartz, July 4th, 1935 in Winnipeg, the youngest of 5 children of Abe and Sophie Schwartz. Her name in Hebrew reflects her parents and her heritage, Rachel bat Avraham v'Tzipora, Rochelle, daughter of Avraham and Zipporah. She grew up in a home on Glenwood Crescent, a street in Elmwood with a considerable Jewish population, with her older sister Ethel and her brothers Harold, Wilfred, and Bernard. Her parents were both immigrants from Europe who had moved to Canada in the early 1900s with their families to escape pogroms and persecution. Both of her parents traced their roots to Moldavia and communities near the Black Sea. Rochelle and her siblings grew up in a home where Yiddish was spoken and where a number of core Jewish values were instilled in her and her siblings by their parents at a very young age: family, community, volunteerism, education. Her mother, Sophie, was devoted to the family, a full-time homemaker who took pride in raising 5 kids, who made sure the home was always beautifully decorated and that there were always fantastic meals on the table, who not only was a terrific cook, but also very talented at knitting and sewing, skills she would regularly volunteer as a member of Hadassah. Rochelle's father, Abe, was a self-made man, an entrepreneur who dabbled with success in various business ventures through the 1920s, including operating a grain elevator in Brandon with his brother-in-law, Norman Crystal, who was uneducated when he arrived in Canada, but taught himself to read and write in English, who after tough times and the economic crisis of 1929 into the 30s, to provide for his family, became an insurance salesman, and not just an insurance salesman, but a very successful insurance salesman. Still, he found time to devote himself to charitable causes, Jewish Child and Family Services, the Jewish Federation of Winnipeg. Abe and Sophie's community-minded approach clearly resonated with and influenced Rochelle. Throughout her life, she was involved in numerous volunteer activities: the National Council of Jewish Women, a group called Future for Youth that helped young people with mental health problems, another program that gave hearing tests to school children, and later in life, one of her favorite causes, Friends of the Winnipeg Public Library. Rochelle had fond memories of her childhood: Glenelm Elementary School, McRae Junior High, St. John's Tech, lots of friends, lots of time spent at the Y on Albert Street, a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Manitoba, and then a year spent living in Montreal just because she wanted to. She met her husband, Sidney Blumenthal, in 1959. He was from Birmingham, England, a doctor who had moved to Swift Current, Saskatchewan to take a job. They were fixed up when a friend of Rochelle's asked her if she wanted to go out with a British doctor. They went to a movie. I stumbled upon the biography Rochelle helped write when she signed the Jewish Foundation's Book of Endowment Book of Life. She said when she met Sidney, "I didn't know if I'd like him at first. He had an English accent, which I found strange at the time. But when he took me in his arms, I knew he was the one for me." Rochelle and Sidney were a perfect complement. He was her yin, she was his yang. They adored each other, and she later said of him, "I looked up to my husband, and he was my hero. His values have guided me throughout my life." They were married June 7th, 1960, right here at Shered Zedek, and moved into a home on Ash Street, where they grew their family: Susan, Heather, Brian, and Jennifer. Sidney was a doctor of internal medicine and a volunteer on the board of Ramah Hebrew School. They enjoyed life in Winnipeg and summers at Winnipeg Beach, the cottage, quite possibly Rochelle's favorite place, where she loved to breathe in the air. Tragically, Sidney died of leukemia in 1978 at the age of just 48, leaving Rochelle to raise 4 kids on her own. She went back to school, got a diploma from Red River College, and became a library technician, working at various libraries across the city. She took classes at the University of Winnipeg. She even graduated from the Florence Melton Program in Jewish Studies at the Rady Center. And she always maintained a commitment to charity and volunteering. Rochelle was a woman who loved the arts, music, the symphony, the theater. She loved learning. She loved reading. She loved bridge, trivia quizzes, and especially good food. But this was a woman who loved people, who loved helping people, who loved getting to know people. Everyone she would come in contact with, she got to know. She'd ask them about their kids. She became invested in their lives. Truly kind-hearted, outgoing, and social. But above all, and above all the people she loved, her true devotion was to her family, to her kids and her grandkids. Of all her accomplishments, they topped the list. And we are fortunate today to hear from a number of her kids, also from grandkids. We'll start by calling up her daughter Heather and her son Brian for a eulogy and reflections on the impact Rochelle has had in their lives.
Our mother's life was permeated with loss. She was just 11 when her sister Sophie, who was like a second mother to her, died. When she was just 25 and engaged to be married, her mother Sophie died. The worst blow, the biggest loss, came in 1978 when our dad died, leaving her a widow with 4 teenaged kids. And later it was her dear friend Boris. But it would be a huge mistake to say that these losses defined her. Rather, it was her intense belief in connection that defined and sustained her over 83 years. To Mom, family and friends, the people in her life were the ultimate priority. Some of these friends, and I see some of you here today, they stretch back to her childhood and youth, and she kept those friendships. She would tell us many times that, oh, she had just been to lunch with so-and-so or so-and-so or so-and-so, friends from her childhood, from high school, from university. These connections were precious to her, and preserving and maintaining them and building new friendships were absolutely crucial for her. I wish, and I know Brian said the same thing and completely independently of me the other night, but I wish I'd known her back when many of you did. I look at her high school yearbook, where her write-up said that with all her club memberships, she barely had time for schoolwork. You know, and a flip through the yearbook absolutely confirms that. She's everywhere, including in her cheerleading sweatshirt, which is kind of hard to fathom because cheerleading is not such a great accomplishment these days, but in those days, I think it was. Later, in university, she was a proud member of Phi Sigma Sigma. She was president of the Pan-Hellenic Society in her second year. And there she is, everywhere again, giving the toast to the Queen at a formal dinner, the toast to the university at another graduation dinner, in verse no less. In the newspaper, giving blood and laughing at the comic who stood behind her. And probably my all-time favorite picture of her, I believe it was a sorority charity fashion show. And there she is going down the runway in her mother's flapper dress with her long beads and a cigarette in a long holder, and the expression on her face is unbelievably wonderful. She's smiling in this twisted smile that just looks like it's that far from breaking out into peals of laughter. And, you know, that's how I like to remember her. And I wish I had known her then. And through all of this, when I look in her old photo albums, there are pictures of her with various dates, not often the same one as far as I can tell, in her beautiful formal dresses, what our cousin Bobby, her nephew, called a real looker she was. After she met her dad, that was it. There were no more beaus. Though she did tell me more than once that, when she first met him, she wasn't sure, and she fixed him up with other women for a while before realizing that that wasn't really the path to go by. She fixed, her first thing was to fix his sartorial sense. She had to cut his tie off on one of their early dates because she didn't like it. But after that, she married him. Reader, she married him. And she started the romance of a lifetime, and one that was cut off far too soon. She was a widow for twice as long as she was a wife. But together, Mom and Dad started a family. They worked, they traveled. There's a lovely picture of them on a beach in Mexico, Mom in her big floppy hat. And they took joy in each other. After he died, his memory sustained her. It gave her strength. And she always said that through all of it, her greatest source of joy and pride were her children, the four of us, and the fact we all turned out reasonably well. We, though, kind of knew that we paled in comparison to her grandchildren. Rebecca, Layla and Zach, Miles and Ira, and Spencer and Jack became the center of her existence. They were the source of incredible joy. She delighted in their successes and achievements. She worried about their travails, and she lived to see them and talk to them. She loved it when Spencer and Jack would ride their bikes over to the Wellington where she lived for the last few years to have lunch with her in the summer, or when she could take Layla or Zach out for lunch. She always took Zach for sushi, despite the fact that really she didn't like it all that much, but it was Zach's favorite. And whenever she was in Toronto or Ottawa, she would take Rebecca or Miles or and Ira out for something to eat. There's a common theme here. I think you're figuring that one out. Mom was a lady who lunched, and she loved her French fries, to the extent that Layla and Rebecca spent quite a few hours trying to develop a French fry grabber that they could give her for her birthday so she wouldn't have to reach across the table anymore. Mom loved giving gifts to the people she loved. She was also incredibly efficient. So there were points where Brian, Ab, Otto, and Boris were all sporting the exact same shirt, and I'm sure Danny would have as well, but he wasn't in the family at that point. When Layla came to stay with us in Ottawa, she felt right at home in Rebecca's room because there were so many things that were exactly the same as she had in her room, because they came from Grandma. Mom was also an incredible planner. As we were sitting in the hospital room with her on last Friday, talking quietly, Mom suddenly opened her eyes and said to us, "Should we have sandwiches at the meal of consolation?" And we said, "Mom, if you'd like sandwiches, we will have them. Absolutely." There wasn't enough notice to actually get them. So if you come back for the meal of consolation, and I hope you will, just try to imagine that there are sandwiches there, okay? Mom dealt with what life threw at her, and she came out time and time again on top. She was the strongest person I know, and the memory of her strength and her belief in the importance of family and friends, of connection, will sustain us as we learn in the coming days to go on without her.
It's really great to see so many family and friends here today. It's a wonderful tribute to our mother. And I'd also like to acknowledge family and friends that may be watching or listening from afar. It's been 41 years since the loss of our father. And at that time, the ceremony that we took part in felt like a loss of life. Today, it actually is a very different experience for all of us and our siblings in that it's really a celebration of life. And it's also, I want to just say at this time, it's always difficult to know what to say to someone that has lost a partner or a parent. And what I do when I meet someone who's in that predicament, I always like to share special memories or thoughts that I have with that individual and those that are grieving. And today, I'd like to do that for you about my mother and with all of you. There might be some overlap, and I apologize for that, but here we are. First of all, the importance of family and home. And you've heard this already, but this really did truly permeate everything Mom did, both for our immediate family and for her extended family. And I've always wondered and thought long about what the genesis of that was. And I think it comes down to this in some ways. She always told me, and we talked a lot about her childhood growing up on Glenwood Crescent. As the rabbi said, that seemed to have been a bit of a hotbed of activity. And she, as you know, was the youngest of 5 children. She had nieces and nephews, indeed closer in age to her than her siblings, as she was the youngest. And our Grandpa Abe and Grandma Sophie liked and wanted to keep everyone close. So did my mother, and I believe that's where that started from. She was also, in my view, very single-minded and purposeful. I believe, and I felt, and I still feel this way, that my mother was covetous and protective of her clan. She liked to say, as we've said already, that her single greatest achievement was raising 4 children following the death of our father, and the satisfaction in knowing that it all turned out fairly well. Also, her home was her castle. And I specifically recall, following our father's passing, that one of the first decisions she made was to pay off the mortgage on the home. She told me at the time that despite being advised, or despite the advice that she received that there were potentially other options here, she said that this ensured that her family would always have a home. This was security for a young mother and a widow, and I believe gave her comfort in knowing that we would always have a home at 105 Ash. My mother also taught me, and I believe my siblings, through example of how to live within your means. This is a lesson that resonates with me to this day. As well, my mother in the 1960s had 4 children. That was a busy time. And if you reflect a little, this was well before anyone knew about disposable diapers. She was indeed the frontline parent. We know that our dad and our father would take time off to be with us, over the summers, for example, and being at the cottage. And this was about summers at Winnipeg Beach. But it was Mum that moved us out to the cottage each summer, from the end of school to Labor Day weekend. We would not return to the city until the September long weekend, and she was there. And when we returned, we would always stop at the Shoppers Drug Mart on Main Street, pick up our school supplies, and transition into school. And at the cottage, she gave us the freedom to be kids and to enjoy ourselves. I would also point out that she was my favorite badminton partner at the cottage. She was pretty competitive too, I might add. My mother also liked to seek out advice on big decisions, but typically after much discussion back and forth, she would respectfully ignore the advice that we tried to give her, and others, and do precisely what she wanted to do. This was not stubbornness on her part. Rather, This was just consistent with just how she rolled. As well, my mother was not afraid to speak her mind. There was no filter. If something was bothering her, she would let us know or let others know about that, for sure. She was also what I would call an unabashed coffee drinker and smoker, and this drove me nuts. I believe her most cherished household item was her percolator. She liked her coffee really strong and lots of it. I also recall that both she and my father used to smoke non-filtered cigarettes, a remarkable habit given what we know today. I would also say that my mother was an incredibly strong person, also very brave and courageous. But she faced a number of challenges during her lifetime. Throughout these challenges, she remained dignified, and most importantly, in my view, she did not let these experiences shape who she was. There was also some occasions when I got older that my mother became less of my mother or my mum, and I saw glimpses of Rochelle, what I would call the thinking, sentient, and fun person that she was. Foremost in my memory is having attended a Leonard Cohen concert in Winnipeg and having heard his first act with my mother, with his incredible voice and his lyrics. I saw my mother at intermission being somewhat giddy with her friends at what they just experienced. I actually think she had a crush on him. This was truly eye-opening for me. I also really enjoyed seeing my mother transition to matriarch and grandmother. We would have our regular phone calls every week. We would talk a lot. And over time, instead of saying, Mom loves you, she would sometimes end the phone calls with, Grandma loves you. So she was referring to herself somewhat in the third person, but it was an interesting transition. But ultimately, she owned that role, and she excelled at it. I saw her develop her own relationship with each of her grandchildren, and she wanted to be a presence in their lives, and she was. She regularly made what I called her Eastern Canada tour. She would visit with me in Toronto and then take a train, just because she enjoyed it, and because they had a good lunch, apparently, to Ottawa for a visit with Heather. She had her regular stops in Toronto that were absolutely mandatory to her when she would come to visit. Holt Renfrew, just to look around, and because it's apparently a great store, and the Studio Cafe. The rest of the time, she was content just to be in our home, drink her coffee, sit in our den, and be part of our family while she was there. Before closing, I want to acknowledge, or at least pay homage to the sentiment that it sometimes takes a village. And there are a couple of people that I want to acknowledge who provided our family with quiet support and guidance over the years. And that would be Morris Steele, and Richard Suris. I also want to give a real loud shout out to my sisters, Jen and Sue, and their families. They provided frontline support to my mother over the years when her health started to decline. This was no small feat, given their busy lives and families. They did so with much love and dedication, and I was always confident that my mom was being well cared for. It truly does take a village. We will all miss our mother, and I hope that when you all leave today, that at some point you'll be able to recollect or also share some of your experiences and thoughts about our mom. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Brian. Now, on behalf of the grandkids, it's my honor to call up Zach to share a few more thoughts on Grandma Rochelle.
My grandma and I had a very special relationship. She was a very special person in my life growing up. I would very much echo all that has been said about her so far. When I was younger, she would take me to McNally Robinson and allow me to pick out a book, and we would have lunch together. This was, and I'm not sure when exactly, but this became a regular thing, probably when I was maybe 14, 15-ish, every month. And I've been reflecting a lot in the past couple of years about kind of what my Uncle Brian said about how my grandma was something of an institution in my life, and I never really knew her as Rochelle. And that changed as I got older, and I feel lucky to have been able to experience that change. I have one memory in particular. I was helping her out with her car. I was taking it somewhere, and I started it, and a jazz CD started playing. And it occurred to me that that didn't fit within my conception of grandma at that time. Okay, my grandma is a person who listens to jazz music, you know? And as those things started to click, that was special for me. In my later teenage years, as I came of age and started to get to know my young adult self, my grandma was there for me always, and in a very special way. We would go for lunch, and I would just talk, and she would ask me about myself and my interests and my activities, and I would fill her in, and that was it. And she had such an interest in all of her grandkids, and I felt as I got older that I had learned a lot about love from her and what it really means to like truly love somebody. My relationship with her, for her, it centered all around me. And as I got older, I tried to get to know her more in the ways that I could. One memory that I was eager to share today with everybody here, when I was a fair bit younger, this is actually quite an early memory for me. I was doing a religion project at school, and I interviewed my grandma. And I asked her something along the lines of whether or not she believed in God. And her answer always stuck with me. From however early this was, it really stuck with me. She said she did, and she told me she did because one day she had been in her kitchen looking out the window, and she experienced grace. She said it just hit her. She experienced grace. And I was young at this time, and she didn't do much to explain what that meant. But it did stick with me, possibly because I didn't fully understand it then, and as I got older, because I began to understand it. Grace is ineffable, and it does not conform to description. And I think she lived her life with grace and with an awareness of grace. As has been said, she was very honest, very straightforward, and there were no pretenses with her ever. She, for the most part, had no patience for them. And in the last couple weeks of her life, when I got to visit the hospital and visit with her, there was a grace in the hospital room as well. I got to spend one evening where she was sleeping, just her and I, and there was a silence in the hospital room. And I felt the grace of her presence. Which was a learning experience for me, because her life was passing, but something about it felt very special, and very honest and very real. And I was lucky enough, all of us were lucky enough to be able to speak with her before she passed. And on my way to the hospital, I wasn't quite sure what to expect out of that conversation. But as normal, I sat down. Our interactions always had a certain rhythm. She was someone who I could share silence with. There would be lulls in our conversation. We would talk, and then we would sit, and we would talk, and we would sit. And I got to the hospital, and she told me about what the experience had been like so far. Went over the banalities with me. There was no grandiloquent words spoken, really. And this felt it felt the way that it was. This was representative of our relationship. No grand words needed to be spoken for us. We were able to share the space together, and I think we both knew what it meant. And I asked her quite directly if she had any fear, and she paused to think about it for a moment, and she said, "No, not really." And that was special to me to hear that. And then, of course, she turned to me and said, "So, how are you?" And I laughed because it was almost ridiculous, but so completely Grandma. So I told her how my courses were going and what was going on in my life, and she smiled. And it felt just like every other conversation that we'd had. But as I said, there was no grand speech was made, but there was a knowing in that, an awareness on both of our parts. And having grandchildren, I think this is really what that meant for her. So I will carry her memory with me always. I learned a lot from her, and I will always have a lot of love for her in my heart, as will all of her grandchildren, I know. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Zach. And finally, Rochelle's son-in-law, Danny, has something he'd like to read.
Comes with water. Thanks, Matthew. So Rochelle has survived. I think you may have got this through some of the eulogies by one brother, Becky Schwartz, who's in Hawaii and couldn't be here with us today and is, I think, sad about that. Maybe he's listening in. His wife, Barbara Bronster Schwartz, sent the family a poem. She wrote a poem, I guess, yesterday, and I've been asked to read it here for you tonight. So I'm kind of a little hesitant, because I don't think I've made it through this poem yet without crying at least twice. So here we go. Rochelle. Farewell, Rochelle. Adieu, goodbye. Sometimes I really wonder why we never utter what we feel until too late. So now the spiel. Remember when we went to shop? It seemed like you could never stop. The lovely shirt you bought for me will conjure up fond memory. The first time that we met Cherie, you arranged a lunch with family. They looked me over, Beulah too. I couldn't wait for the review. I passed the muster, so you said. How sad is life, they too are dead. We loved to visit at your home. You always asked, I write a poem. So mostly wrote to Spencer, who found love for me and love for you. Then lovely Layla and your Jack and teaching me, we come to Zach. I thought, how lucky can I be? I have another family. You told me all about the rest. Believe me, I would fail that test. You worried and you warned me well that Bake and I might have a spell. But I assured you all the time there is no reason and no rhyme, for we are happy and content, so that was how our hour was spent. So often to McNally's lunch, I did enjoy our time a bunch. You seemed so busy every day, your book club seemed a happy play. But uppermost, the family, the stay together saved the tree. Whoever came from near or far, a luncheon planned for each new star. The early years were really best, the golden years put to the test. You'd pick me up in your RAV4, you loved that scrawny car for sure. A cigarette we'd share in it, a promise, silence that we'd quit. The intimacy that we'd share is simply gone, I'm unaware. And so it is that friendships end. I'll keep you in my heart, my friend. My feeling goes to your brother who has lost so much and what to do. He'd make sure that he'd always phone his brother, sister, now alone. Your girls and son, their children too, a gracious legacy for you. The shining glory, Blumenthal, a bit less shiny since your fall. Farewell again, at peace the rest. Our love, Rochelle, you were the best. Barbara Bronster Schwartz. Thank you.
Wow. You really get, though many of you probably already knew, a complete picture of, as we said at the beginning, a remarkable lady. It's fitting that her Hebrew name, Rochelle, is one of the names of the matriarchs in Jewish tradition, because in her family and in the greater community, matriarch is a word that most definitely describes Rochelle Blumenthal, as is one other concept, something called the Eshet Chayo, a woman of valor. This is taken from a passage in the book of Proverbs, which says, "A mother of generations, a woman of valor, what a precious find. Her worth is far beyond rubies. She's precious in the gifts she's given her family. Her children have found trust and truth in these gifts. They follow in patterns she taught. She opens her hand to the needy and extends her hand to the poor. She is robed in strength and splendor and dignity. She looks to the future cheerfully. She opens her mouth with wisdom. Her tongue is guided by kindness. We benefit and learn from her. She attends to the affairs of her household and never eats the bread of idleness. Her children come forward and bless her. Many women have done superbly, but you surpass them all. May she always be credited for the fruit of her labor and her achievements. Wherever people gather, her deeds speak her praise. May she live on in glory." This really is the highest compliment you can pay a woman, to call her an Eshet Chayo, which Rochelle Blumenthal most certainly was. She made her community better, everyone around her. She made her family possible. Because of her, they not only survived, but thrived. She will be dearly missed by all who were lucky to know her. May her name live on in glory. Please rise now for the memorial prayer of the El Malei Rachamim. El Malei Rachamim shochen bamromim Ametzei menucha nechona tachat kanfei ha-shechina b'malot kedoshim utehorim kezohar arakia mazhirim et nishmat Rachel bat Avram v'tzipora she'alcha le'olama. Began Eden te menuchata. Ana bal harachamim. Hasirea beseter knafecha leolamim. Utzeror mitzeror achaim enishmata. Adonai hu nachalata. V'tanuach v'shalom hamishkava v'nomar amen. Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure to the soul of Rochelle Blumenthal, Rachel, daughter of Avraham and Sipporah, who has gone to her eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May her soul be bound up in the bond of life. May she rest in peace. And let us all say Amen. Please be seated. Our service continues at the Sherry Zedek Cemetery, 230 Armstrong Avenue, for interment. Everyone is encouraged to join us to accompany Rochelle, as we mentioned, to her final resting spot. We'll be driving in caravan fashion with our four-way flashers on, still stopping for all red lights. The route we take is up Sherbrooke to Logan, right on Logan to Salter, over the bridge, and all the way up Salter to Armstrong. Again, you are invited to join us if you would prefer to stay here at the synagogue, because we will be returning here for a meal of consolation after our trip to the cemetery. If you would choose to stay here, please know that it's usually about an hour and a half from when we leave to when we get back, with traffic and everything. As I mentioned, after the cemetery, we return here for a meal, as our thoughts as a community turn from honoring Rochelle to comforting her family, who are in a state of mourning and grieving, to join our hearts together with theirs. In the same spirit of bringing comfort, Rochelle's family will be sitting Shiva at Jennifer and Danny's home, 103 Lamont Boulevard, with visitation Saturday, Sunday, and Monday evenings from 7 to 9. Saturday, Sunday, and Monday from 7 to 9. And on Sunday and Monday evening, there will be davening, there will be prayers at 7:30. In a moment, we'll ask the family and the pallbearers to leave first. Then when the doors at the back of the sanctuary are opened up, everyone else can leave. We ask that you follow a custom that we've had here at Sherry Zedek for a long time, of through the lobby and onto the stairs leading outside, forming two rows of love and support through which the casket and the pallbearers can pass through. Our final words are for the family. In Hebrew we say, Hamakom yinachem etchem, Betoch sha'ar avelei Tzion v'Yerushalayim. May you be comforted and consoled. May God comfort and console you among all those who mourn and who have ever mourned in our community. With that, I invite the family, pallbearers, to exit by way of the chapel. And I thank you all again for coming and being here this morning for Rochelle. Thank you.